Meg Kissinger. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm so happy to be here.
Meg, you wrote such an amazing book while we were out, an intimate family portrait of mental illness in the era of silence. I was so taken by your book, and I know it's touched the lives of so many. And I'm so excited to have you here to talk about your book and to talk about mental illness and to talk about how you find joy even when it's hard. Yeah, so let's get started. What prompted you, I guess, to write such an intimate book about your family?
Thank you for that question. I sometimes wonder as I was writing this, I would ask myself many times a day, who the hell had this idea to write this book? The answer is me. And it's because I spent so many years as a newspaper reporter writing about the ravages of mental illness and what a horrible job we do in this world, but more specifically in this country, in caring for people with serious mental illness. And that passion came from my personal experience. So, growing up as I did, the fourth of eight kids in a family that had a lot of mental illness, but at a time, so I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and we just didn't have the language. We didn't know what the heck we were dealing with. And we never said the words bipolar or depression, but that certainly cut a big path in our family. So I was naturally curious about the topic. And then as a journalist, I went all over the country and interviewed people and learned the scandal of why it is that we don't do better for people who suffer like this. And I really got fried, Kathy. I spent so many years writing these stories and they were so grim. And I just remember lying on the banks of Lake Michigan and just splayed out. And I just come back from this harrowing trip out to California with a mother and her son. And it turned out to just be awful and for everybody. And I just thought, I'm not getting it done. I need to come up with a different approach. And my whole motivation was for people to understand what it's like to be in a family where there's mental illness, because we don't really talk about what families go through. So, bing, the light bulb went off, and I just decided, okay, I'm going to write a book about this. And then, if you can imagine, I called my brothers and sisters and said, hey, what if I write a book about what our family went through and all the bells and whistles, the most humiliating, painful events of our lives? How about it? And they were, to a person, anyway, I was, that was a big ask on my part, and bless their hearts, they were on board. So off I went and wrote this book.
So beautiful. And I know it's touched so many already. I think what you talk about too is like the shame around it, the shame around
Right.
not only for the individual, but for
Mhm.
the family. Like there's something wrong with the family. I mean, there is something wrong with the family,
Yeah, there's something wrong with the family, but
but
it's
there's
not our
something
fault.
wrong with all our families.
Yes. So one of my favorite quotes comes from Tom Insel, who was the director of the National Institute of Mental Health. And he said, wisely, there are two families in America: those with mental illness and those who don't have mental illness yet. So, in other words, everybody. But you wouldn't know that from casual conversations, cocktail party banter, or just everyday conversation. So I wanted to bear witness. I wanted to hold our family up as an example of a family that has a lot of love and a lot of joy. We had so much fun growing up, but we also had terrible sorrow. And it was just, again, nothing that we talked about openly. And Kathy, since this book came out in September, so whatever that is, 7 or 8 months, I have had hundreds, maybe even thousands at this point, of conversations with people about saying, you might as well have been writing about my family. So I know it's ubiquitous. I know that there are so many families out there struggling, but that shame still persists. And even though, we talk a big game about like being more open, and we are, and I'm very grateful for that, but we still live under a shadow of shame.
Yeah, one of your part in your book, like Nancy, Danny, and Jake, they're intellectually smart, but
Oh
they
yeah.
have functional impairments that interfere with the ability to take care of themselves. Their thinking is clouded or they're easily overwhelmed. And I think that's what's really hard for a lot of people to understand, right? With somebody who's really smart
Mhm.
or looks, quote, normal, whatever that is,
Mhm.
and
Right.
they still struggle. And I think in my experience with members of my family or members of friends, that's what's hard to
Mhm.
understand and have compassion for at times.
Yeah, we want to assign blame. I think it's maybe a human instinct. If somebody is acting out, and a lot of behavior of people who have serious mental illness is bizarre or off-putting. They can be mean. It's disturbing. And so I believe it's a natural instinct to say, who's to blame for this? And we're very quick to want to blame. Usually they blame the mother, and the father too, but
Well,
it must
mother
be.
blame is all over for everything.
Yeah, totally, totally. It's always the mom's fault. We are nervous about why it is that either we don't feel like we belong, whatever, somebody in our midst, somebody in our family is suffering from mental illness, and that's a scary thing. And that because there's so much that we don't know about the cause of mental illness, and we certainly don't know a cure, nonetheless, we're frightened by that. And so to cover up our fear, we're quick to assign blame. And, it's a moral failing, it's a character flaw, it's bad parenting. We blame people for their illnesses in a way that we would not blame somebody with cancer or heart disease. And so that's really another one of my motivations in writing this book, was to show that these are people who are loved, and yes, they're bright as heck. I mean, Nancy and Danny were two of the smartest kids in our family, and Jake is brilliant. So, it's not an intelligence thing, and it's certainly not anything anybody wants. Who in the world wants to have mental illness?
Right,
Nobody.
right. I love also when you spoke at St. Francis, you spoke about Jake and how that's one of your brothers who
Mhm.
suffers from, I believe, depression
Yeah.
and I think severe depression, correct me if I'm wrong. And you spoke about how much you admired him always for
Mm.
telling his loved ones when he wasn't feeling well and when he needed help. And I just thought that was so beautiful because it was just like you were just like, you know what? You are amazing for always reaching out for help when you need it.
Yeah, he's my role model. So everybody in the world, go out and be more like Jake Kissinger. So Jake is my older brother. He's going to be 70 on New Year's Eve, that rascal. And he lives in a group home in Skokie, Illinois. He wants to live in a group home. Over the years, they've encouraged him to get his own apartment. Nope, he loves the excitement and the jazz of congregate living. He's used to growing up in a big family, and he likes the dinner table banter. But Jake has the rare humility and courage to talk so plainly and clearly about what he's struggling with, and without judgment of himself. He's not like saying, "Oh, I'm such a loser, I'm too depressed to get out of bed." It's, "This is what I have. That my depression paralyzes me," and he takes the blame out of it. And he does the same with us. When he calls one of us when we're having a bad hair day or whatever else is going on in our life, and he's so gentle and encouraging and cheerful about, just supportive, not in a goofy or obnoxious way. It's in a very gentle way, and just to say, "Oh, I'm sorry you're having a hard time," and he's just there for you. And I've just learned so much in watching him about really the power of just gently listening to somebody and being with them when they're struggling. It doesn't take a lot. It doesn't cost any money. It doesn't take a lot of effort. And I think we fall into this despair when we talk about how overwhelming it is to have so many people struggling with mental illness. And there's so much that our society doesn't do in terms of covering it with, good insurance policies or providing enough care. And medication is probably not what it should be. But what we can do is learn ways to talk to each other and listen and be supportive.
Beautiful. What would you say to families who struggle with someone in their family, which, by the way, if it's not in your family, it's probably in your relative's family in some way, because the statistics are significant. It's right. It's 1 out of 4 or 5 people will suffer
Mhm.
from a serious mental illness at some point
Yeah,
in their
that's right.
lives. Is that right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, one out of used to be 1 out of 5, and I recently I've been hearing 1 out of 4. I think since the pandemic, people are just coming out of the woodwork too. So yes,
Right.
my advice to people who have either they're struggling with their mental health or they have people in their family with serious mental illness, make time for yourself. It is very hard to be around people who are depressed or bipolar. That's our family disease is bipolar, and that there's wide swings. It's unpredictable. It's scary sometimes just because you don't know from one day to the next, or sometimes 1 hour to the next, what the situation is going to be. And it could turn, it can be very volatile. So allow yourself space and time and places to breathe and get away from that. And then when you're with that person, look at them with compassion and empathy, and know that they're trying, and it might not look like it, but they've got a saddle on them. They're burdened with this illness that they don't want to have, and it causes them to think and do awkward things, and it's very frightening for them. The week before my brother Danny died, he wrote me a letter, and Danny never wrote me a letter in his life. So when I got this letter, it was like, whoa, what's going on here? And in it, he talked about what it was like for him living with bipolar. And he'd never admitted, he'd never talked about the fact that he had an illness. He was quite defensive whenever anybody would suggest that. He would get hostile almost. But at this stage in his life, he was accepting of it. And he'd gotten on some medication that I think gave him a little clarity. And he was really apologizing for all the things that he had said and done, which was very worrisome because, when somebody changes like that, it could be a sign of being suicidal. And sadly, that's exactly what it was. But in that letter, Danny said, it's awful to live with mental illness. And what we need to do is to love people and love and understand them. And I thought that was so cheesy when he wrote that. But then the next week he died. And the more I got to reflecting on that, the more I could see he was exactly right. That's the perfect algorithm is we need to love one another, and we need to work to understand them. Anyway, I wrote those words down on an index card and I taped them to the side of my computer in the newsroom. And for the next 25 years, that's what I did. I went out all over the country and, talked to people living with serious mental illness, and just to say, what can we do to treat you better? How can we help you more?
What was the overarching lesson you learned with that, or message that you heard that we as a society could do better?
Just looking at people with mental illness in the same way that you look at people with any other illness. So true parity, true equality. People with mental illness should not be set apart. No, we shouldn't refer to them as the mentally ill. There shouldn't be a separate phone line for your insurance to get approval for treatment for a mental illness than you should for a sore throat or a broken leg or your diabetes. So there's a tremendous amount of discrimination still against people with mental illness. And again, it harkens back to centuries of setting people apart. The history of mental health care is really spooky. It's right out of a Gothic novel. We built these horrible looking asylums on the outskirts of town so nobody had to look or think about people with mental illness. We strapped them to chairs, and we did all kinds of crazy treatment to calm them down. And it was only when Thorazine was developed in the 1940s that that medication allowed people who were having delusions to not be so chaotic and violent. And, but then we over medicated people. So the biggest takeaway is to just look at people, regard people struggling with mental illness as human beings, and treat them with compassion, treat them with empathy.
Right. And if your family is dealing with a significant mental illness, to really make time for self-care is what I'm hearing you say as well.
Totally. That this is so important. It's been a long time since my brother and sister walked this earth, but in those years, the next generation is coming up, and some of those kids are also struggling with their mental health. And so we're reminded now of what that was like, of the volatility and the just the how grim it can be. Somebody with terrible depression, it's just such an awful life. It's a sorrow just to see people, they're not literally chained to their beds, but their illness holds them down so much that they can barely function. And that's just so sad to see people suffer like that. So, it takes a lot of energy to support people living like that, and just to say, I'm here for you. I'm so sorry for what you're going through. I can see the pain on your face. And I just want you to know I love you, and I want to help you as best I can.
Beautiful. I think Andrew Solomon, he said something like, helping somebody with mental illness is not necessarily helping them with medication or a job or whatever. Sometimes it's just saying, do you want to go to lunch?
Yeah. And it's like just acknowledging you're hurting. We, at least in our family, it was like, keep dancing. There's nothing here for you to see, like, woo. But it's very important to acknowledge the pain that people are going through. And, these words are so psychobabbly, but they're true. You want to validate somebody's feelings and let them know, I understand. I don't think you can understand 100%, or you don't want to, because it's a terrible burden to have that, the saddle of mental illness. But just that you want to just acknowledge that they're in pain and be there for them as best as you can.
Yes, a family therapist we once worked with for all of our family stuff. Um,
Yeah,
she said it's so good. She's like just acknowledging and then saying, is there anything like I hear you, I hear you. Is there anything else?
right.
Before you
Yes,
go, it was so good. It's so simple, right? It's like, I hear you. Okay, you feel this way, you feel this way. Okay, did I miss anything? I'm
right.
like, that is brilliant because then the
Yep.
person really feels heard
Yes,
before you go into, wait, I want to tell you how I feel, but then the
right.
person really feels heard. And I think it's just a beautiful technique with anyone in our
Yeah.
lives, right? Is there anything
Oh,
else?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Um, so what advice would you give to somebody who has a powerful story and wants to share it with the world regarding mental illness or anything? I work with a lot of people who want to share their stories, but they feel like they can't or they're blocked in some way. What would you say to them?
Yeah, it's very powerful to be able to tell your story. It's quite a privilege and quite a gift. And I have been so grateful and to have had that opportunity. And as I said, it's just opened the floodgates for people to share their stories with me. So I know there are a lot of stories out there. And if you can get them out of your body and into the world in some way, it can be quite helpful. So my advice is get your butt in a chair and write it down. Not everybody likes to write, or, might be fearful of that, but it is very helpful. I'm not a person who journals. I'm not organized enough for that. But when I finally resolved to write this book, I sure did have to have structure to what I was writing. And so my first order of business was to pull out a legal pad, and I wrote down 75 different scenes of what was going on in my life. Let me back up though to say that before I even did that though, I had to figure out what was my message. Why would somebody want to read this book? I took this great class on memoir writing, and the woman who teaches it, a woman by the name of Marion Roach Smith, her book is called The Memoir Project, and it's excellent. Anyway, Marion advises everybody that your memoir is not about you. And I was like, what, girl? It most certainly is. Like, all about me. I'm writing it. But nope, she's like, nope, nobody really cares about you. They don't know who you are. So it has to be what they're going to learn because of something that you went through. So figure out what your argument is. So my argument was that shame is toxic and shame can kill. And when we assign shame and blame to mental illness, then bad things are going to ensue. And so then I wrote down all those scenes. So, for example, I wrote a little scene about me going to the eye doctor with my mom when I think I was about 8 years old. And I was so excited because it was just my mom and me in the station wagon, and nobody else, no other little brothers or sisters or dogs or any distractions, just my mom and me. And that was important to show because my mother had struggled with depression her whole life. And so to get an audience alone with her, especially when there were 8 kids, and I was number 4 of those 8 kids, you don't get a lot of FaceTime with your mom. And I don't mean FaceTime in the Facebook way. I mean old fashioned actual face in front of actual face. So that was one scene. And then other scenes in the book, like on the night that my sister died and my dad called us all into the living room and said, if anybody asks, this was an accident. So all these scenes that illustrate what that was like to live in shame and what that caused. So that's my advice is get your butt in a chair, think about what you want to say, find a way to tell it because it really helps. It really goes a long way in both healing for you and healing for other people.
Yes. The one line in the book that really struck me, well, many lines in your book struck me. They were so powerful, but you write, our family's shorthand way of dealing with situations by not discussing them or making light of them had an insidious way of feeling shame and blame where none was warranted.
Yeah. I was just in Indiana. Some kids have all the fun. And I was at an event. The woman who interviewed me was my college roommate, a hilarious, brilliant, lovely lady named Melissa Long. This was in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We hadn't seen each other in 45 years. Anyway, and it was just like 1978 all over again, but with arthritis. Anyway, and she was just lovely. And she said, when we roomed together my senior year, we got to campus in August. Nancy, my sister Nancy, had just died. She had died earlier that summer. And Melissa remembers me telling her that Nancy had died. It was kind of like, "What did you do this summer?" And I'm like, "Oh, buried my sister." And I said it so blithely and just like I made some wisecrack about it. And then I was like, "Oh, gotta go." I was the editor of the college paper, and I was always busy. But she said, "You dropped this bomb on me, and then you just left." And that was how we dealt with things, was just like blurted it out, made a joke out of it, and just didn't really allow ourselves the space to process all that. Not good. Do not recommend that manner of coping. So, humor is wonderful and it's a great salve, but you can't just joke your way through tragedy. You really have to allow yourself to feel all the feels and let it soak in and really process it.
Yes, beautiful. What would you say to people who are struggling with a situation in their family or themselves? What advice would you say to help them find joy too?
Yeah, so I have the good fortune of living across the street from Lake Michigan. So we can see the lake a little bit, like if there are no leaves on the trees. And in my kids' bedrooms, you can see like little pieces, and it's a wavy day. My joke is that we have a view of people who have a view. But anyway, I love jumping in Lake Michigan, and I go in every day of the year. And in the coldest day of January, I have a wetsuit now because it's like 40 degrees, and I would be dead if I frolicked in January and February without a wetsuit. But anyway, it fills me up. I just got out of the lake an hour ago, and there's on sunny days, the sparkles are just bouncing off the waves. On cloudy, or we go in when it's raining. The only time we won't go in is if there's lightning, and even that once we did. But anyway, it just brings me so much joy, and it's a very great way of just getting out of your body and just throwing your spirit up to the sky. I go with a bunch of ladies and we look a little witchy sometimes. We always, but right before we get out of the lake, we hold hands and we do this chant where we say, "Hear me, O universe, I am grateful." And it's just to say those words is it's just exhilarating. So that, I love taking walks. There's all kinds of ways to find joy in this world. And I'm always open for doing just that because, you got to fill your tank up if you're going to help other people and if you're going to help yourself. You have to find that balance. Not always easy. There's some days when I'm like, ooh, it's sleeting out, and do I really want to struggle lugging my wetsuit on? But I'm never disappointed. I've never gone to the lake and said, this was a mistake.
I love it. What time do you do it every day? And how long do you stay in the water?
Well, it depends. Like, so usually we go about 8 in the morning and we stay in half an hour. We frolic, we jump around, we twirl, we do the little otter spin. We've got our little tricks. And when it's wavy, it's awesome. So yeah, it's just a great way to just be joyful.
I love that. That sounds like so much fun.
Yeah, come on up.
What advice would you give to people who want to find more purpose in their life?
Yeah, I'm so lucky that I have this purpose now. My battle cry is to help people find that love and understanding. Yeah, that's a great purpose for me. Yeah, what are you passionate about and what do you care about and how can you help people tap into that same mission? So, what you do is so beautiful. I mean, this podcast is such a great way to help people, give them good ideas, and talked with people who have unlocked that door to, happiness or success, or not that it isn't, still a struggle. I mean, it's not like that once I've written this book, it's like I'm on total easy street. Certainly not. There are daily challenges. Yeah, that my advice would just be that is to figure out what it is that you're most passionate about and what you want to help other people understand.
And quite often it seems that a lot of times people's own struggles or family struggles, there is purpose in that in some way. Would you agree?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, who's more important to us than our family? And the expression that you're only as happy as your least happy kid. And, I know that to be very true. I speak in platitudes sometimes, and that's a little bit misleading. I mean, I'm an optimistic person. I've always, my glass is always at least half full, probably flowing over sometimes, but that's just how I'm wired. But I do acknowledge that other people, don't have that same outlook. And so, I just have to, yeah, just hope that maybe again, if you can help somebody, that's cause enough.
If you can help someone, that's a purpose in itself, right? I know I used to think this way, like it had to be big, it had to be, you know, something really important. And actually, I think you can find purpose, right, in the smallest ways that are really meaningful.
Oh, totally. I was just down in Florida. I've been traveling a lot lately since this book, but my old next door neighbor, so this kid that I grew up next door to, we reconnected through the book, and our mothers were good friends. This woman's mother also struggled with depression, and she and my mom were kind of this little hidden sorority. They would have these wonderful, soulful conversations about what it was like to be depressed and raising these big families and just all the challenges that came with that. And I used to listen outside my mom's bedroom door, and I was so taken by that. I was really touched by how my mom was helping this lady, and I'm sure she was helping my mom. Anyway, when the book came out, my next door neighbor, Shotzi is her name, Shotzi invited me down to Florida. Shotzi is now a therapist. So she has turned her pain, the struggles that she had growing up with a mom who was very seriously depressed. And now Shotzi is working as a therapist to help other people. Anyway, so I went down there and we did this great conference. We did this great talk at this mental health conference about, just that about growing up in that era with these mothers who really had this saddle. and what we did to kind of power through. And it was just it was so joyful. I mean, it was so profound and meaningful to me to see how she has powered through. She's a beautiful artist. She's got this therapy practice. She's a rower. She gets out on the river every morning and does her crew. And so, what a great role model. And just to know that she grew up under, some of the most challenging of circumstances. And here she is thriving and helping other people. And there are so many people out there like that.
There are. And also the beauty of that story, also you just shared, is just when we share our struggles, when we share the truth with
Mhm.
others, there is always community.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe how many people come up to me and say, as I said, you could have written this book about my family, or this is what they're going through right now. And yeah, they feel overwhelmingly, they say, I'm so grateful that you bore witness, that you told your family story, because it helped me realize that I'm not alone.
Yes. And when you know you're not alone, it just doesn't fix things, but you feel better. You're like,
Yeah,
you're not the only person in this world who struggles with this. And
absolutely.
it's really powerful. So you gave such a beautiful voice showing so many families, most of our families, that you're not alone in
Yeah.
the craziness.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and so we're all getting together this weekend. I'm so excited. So Catholic Charities in Chicago has a great program for families who have been through suicide. It's called LOSS, which stands for Loving Outreach of Suicide Survivors. You might remember, Kathy, that in the book they had a little memorial gathering. This was a couple years after Danny died. Irreverent scene in my book where we all show up to have this kind of soulful time of remembrance. And there were quilt squares that you were meant to do a little square. Each family had a quilt square for the person in their family who had died by suicide. So we had two quilt squares, and we were working our way through the line. And these were young people by and large. And we got to this one square, and it was a lady who was 87 years old who had died. And my brother Jake, who's very a concrete thinker, he looked at that square and he said, 87? She couldn't have just waited a year or two? Anyway, everybody just burst out laughing. And of course, you're not supposed to be laughing, but that's our Kissinger family way. So here is everybody crying, and the piano music is very soulful, and we're trying not to laugh. And the more we're trying not to laugh, the harder we're laughing. Anyway, this same organization is kindly inviting us to their annual event to thank us for telling our story in this book. We should be thanking them because they're the ones out there helping these families. But we're all going to be together, and that brings me so much happiness to know that we've all rallied around. All six surviving Kissinger, I call them kids, but one of them's 72, and the rest of us are in our 60s. So the fact that our family is out there really, again, like holding ourselves up and saying, you're not alone. And I just want to hug all my brothers and sisters for agreeing to let me tell this family story.
It's beautiful. And it just shows you can find humor in everything. And you have to find it when things are hard, because that's what helps give you hope.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really does. Yeah.
What would you say for people who are really struggling with either their own mental illness or someone in their family? What would you say that would give them hope right now?
People get better. So I spent so many years writing about the atrocious way that we treat people with mental illness. I got pretty jaded, but I've realized in the ensuing years, and especially in writing this book, people get better. They do. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have major depression or schizophrenia or bipolar. Those are lifetime illnesses that are always going to be there. I start out the book by talking about how my sister Patty and I used to think that tigers lived under our beds, and we would jump across, from one bed to the other to like tease the tigers. And sometimes we would fall asleep holding hands, try to hold hands over what we called the tiger pit. But what I've realized over the years is that we're never going to beat those tigers. Those tigers are always going to be with us. And sometimes they're going to scratch us. Sometimes they're going to ignore us. Sometimes they'll be playful and we'll have fun with the tigers, but the tigers are always going to be there. So we do well to remember that, or find ways to just live with the burden of that, and find ways to respect it and accommodate it and acknowledge it and embrace it. Nobody wants to have these illnesses, but we can't help it. We just do. And so to find peace with that, to find peace and to accept it.
Mm-hmm. And part of how you do that too is being honest and open with, of course, people you can trust, but not having it be a secret, because the secret is what makes the shame worse.
Yeah, nobody asked for this. This is nothing that you should be embarrassed about or feel any sense of blame. This is what it is. This is reality. And let's help each other. So this person is struggling with depression or chaotic thinking, bipolar, they're hearing voices, they can't think straight, they can't organize themselves. Let's help them. And let's learn from them too. It's not just all giving. There's some taking too. As I mentioned, my brother Jake, who is struggles with a lifetime of very serious depression and anxiety. I learn from him all the time. So if we take that time and allow ourselves to have relationships with people who are suffering from mental illness, there's a lot we can learn from them too.
What is the biggest lesson you've learned from Jake?
That it's part of who he is. He's not defined by his illness. He's not just a guy with depression and anxiety. He's a guy who's hilarious. He's a guy who's brilliant. He's a guy who's a little quirky. Um, he's a guy who loves, knowing the most arcane facts. He's a little walking almanac and encyclopedia, but he's many things. And he's a human being. First and foremost, he's a human being. That's what I've learned. I would say the greatest lesson I've learned from him is just to accept who you are.
Beautiful. What would 95-year-old Meg tell Meg today?
Oh my God. Keep going in the lake. Like that wetsuit is like pretty old by now, but keep pulling that wetsuit on. Keep jumping in the lake. Keep looking for ways to find joy. Be so grateful that you had the life that you had. I mean, I have this most amazing life, and it's made so much richer because of having written this book and having conversations like this. And what a privilege, and all gratitude for that.
You seem to have lived your life, tell me where I'm wrong, just from the sense of reading your book, you seem to have lived your life with just trusting the next thing for you without having this big plan. Is that fair to say?
Oh my God, totally true. And not intentional. It's just because I'm too hyper to ever plan anything. I have the worst sense of direction. My husband always says to me, he's like, what must it like to be in your head and never know where you're going? I just don't. I guess that's faith. I guess that's trust, which comes from faith. And I believe that faith is a gift. Anyway, whatever it is, I'm lucky to have it. I do believe that most things work out. And that's proven to be true for me so far.
But it also seems, because so many times I work with people, they're like, I don't know what to do next. I know I want to do something different. And I'm always trying to coach them to the extent I can. What is the next right thing for you? It's not about the plan for the year necessarily.
Right.
It's what is the next right thing. And I think just from reading your book and your career, which has been amazing, you've always followed that. It's not like you had this big plan, but you trusted the next right thing.
That's exactly right. And that was my mother's favorite expression, is do the next right thing.
Beautiful. What would you tell your 7-year-old Meg today?
Oh, just you're a good kid, and you can't help it if you're chatty and Sister Mary David puts you in the wastepaper basket. And just because you're the middle kid and nobody pays attention to you, they will someday. You'll find your spot.
It's beautiful. What would you tell people, particularly women sometimes struggling with confidence? I see this a lot. They struggle
Mhm.
with confidence, um, and imposter syndrome. What advice would you give to them?
I had imposter syndrome, of course. I was always expecting to get called into my editor's office and being told that, that I'm out on my tin can. But it never happened. Quite the opposite happened. They were so supportive and encouraging. We can do so many things, and just to know that your own value, your own worth, you're doing a good job. I need to big up myself, or just remind yourself if your intention is true and you're working hard to do the right thing. That's a stupid answer, but you know what I mean.
Totally. So I just want to thank you so much for being on the show. You've given so many great tips, and I really encourage everyone to read your book. And I want to thank you so much.
Kathy, thank you for having me. I so enjoy talking to you, and thanks for all you do.
Oh, you're sweet. Thank you.